There is a secret that has been buried for 2,000 years. Not in a tomb, not in a lost manuscript, not in the ruins of a forgotten civilization. It was buried inside you. Right now, as you watch this, there is an organ in your body that ancient Egyptians considered so sacred, they built entire temples in its image. An organ that Taoist masters spent lifetimes learning to awaken. An organ that shamans of the Amazon listened to before making decisions for an entire tribe. An organ that indigenous women across every continent revered as the source of their most profound intelligence. And modern medicine? Modern medicine looks you in the eye and says, you don't need it anymore. Let's remove it. Millions of women have heard those exact words. Millions have agreed. Not because they were weak, not because they were wrong, but because no one, not one voice in all the noise of doctors and diagnoses and waiting rooms, ever told them the other story. The story where this organ is not a disposable vessel, not a biological inconvenience to be managed until it becomes too troublesome to keep. Not a ticking clock of fibroids and bleeding and pain that you simply endure until someone finally offers to take it away. The story where it is the most powerful center in the entire female body, the seat of intuition, the keeper of ancestral memory, the altar from which entire civilizations once drew their deepest wisdom. That organ is your womb, and what was done to the knowledge surrounding it, the deliberate erasure, the centuries of silence, the systematic replacement of reverence with shame, is perhaps the greatest spiritual crime in human history. You were told it was a muscular bag. You were told its only purpose was to carry a child. You were told that once that purpose was fulfilled, or simply no longer relevant, it becomes a source of problems. Something to be monitored with suspicion, suppressed with hormones, and ultimately discarded like a worn-out part in a machine that has moved on to other functions. But the priestesses of Isis knew otherwise. The Taoist mistresses knew otherwise. The shamans of the Amazon, the midwives of Mexico, the elder women of the Navajo, every tradition that was not built on the erasure of feminine power knew otherwise. And somewhere, beneath every layer of shame and silence and medical indifference that has been packed down on top of it, across 2,000 years of deliberate forgetting, your body knows otherwise too. You may have felt it. A pull, a quiet ache, a knowing that something important was being overlooked every time the conversation stopped at biology and went no further. That feeling was not anxiety. It was not hormones. It was the oldest part of you, trying to be heard. This is not a video about anatomy. This is not a lecture about reproductive health or hormonal cycles or surgical alternatives. This is the story they erased, the knowledge they buried, the power they were afraid you would remember if anyone ever sat down and told you the full truth, and you are about to remember it. If this already resonates, if something in your chest just shifted even slightly, please like this video right now. It is a simple gesture, but it is also a declaration. I am ready to hear this. And leave a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from, what time it is, what hour and minute, because the women gathering in this space deserve to know they are not alone, that this remembering is happening everywhere, all at once, across every time zone and every kind of life. Stay until the end. What comes next will change how you see yourself permanently. 4,000 years ago, on the banks of the Nile, a group of architects received an instruction that made no sense to the uninitiated. Build the temple in the shape of a woman's body, not as a symbol, not as decoration, as a literal blueprint. The entrance narrow, like a cervix, the corridor widening slowly as you move inward, and at the very center, a circular sanctuary, dark, warm, enclosed, a place where sound echoed differently than anywhere else in the known world, a place the Egyptians called the Holy of Holies. And here is what strikes you when you stand inside one of these structures, even today, even as a modern person with no connection to ancient ritual. Something in your nervous system responds before your mind can explain it. A settling, a recognition, as if the body remembers a geometry that the mind forgot centuries ago. This was not architecture. This was a message carved in stone and built to last forever, so that no matter how much time passed, no matter how many empires rose and collapsed on top of each other, Some woman in some future century would walk through those doors and feel it in her body before she understood it in her head. You are not entering a building. You are entering yourself. The priestesses of Hathor, goddess of love, sound, and the sacred feminine, performed their rituals in exactly these spaces. They did not simply believe that the architecture resonated with the female body. They built their entire spiritual practice around that resonance. When a woman moved through those corridors, something inside her began to vibrate in recognition. Not an emotion, not a thought, something older than both. Knowing that lived in the tissue itself. Now pause here for a moment, because what you need to understand is that this was not one isolated culture with one unusual idea. At the same time that Egyptian priestesses were singing inside womb-shaped temples on the Nile, on the other side of the world, Taoist alchemists in ancient China were arriving at the exact same conclusion through a completely different path. They called the womb the palace of the child, but the child they were referring to was not made of flesh. Inside this palace, they taught, a woman could cultivate an immortal spiritual body. They called it the golden embryo, not a metaphor, a literal practice, a path of inner alchemy so powerful, so carefully guarded, that it was passed only by word of mouth, from mistress to student, never written in any public text, never made available to anyone outside the closed lineages. Think about that for a moment. An entire branch of one of the world's oldest spiritual traditions, deliberately hidden, protected, sealed away from public knowledge, not because it was dangerous, because it was too valuable to risk losing to the wrong hands. Male alchemy worked with seed. Female alchemy worked with the womb. Two paths to the same summit. But the feminine path was kept so deliberately secret that until the 20th century, almost no one outside those circles even knew it existed. And then in Vedic India, thousands of miles away, ancient texts were mapping the womb's connection to the second energy center, Svadhisthana, the chakra of water, of lunar cycles, of creativity, of the deep capacity to feel, not to analyze, not to strategize, to feel in the full, unguarded, embodied sense of the word. When this center is blocked, these texts said, a woman does not simply lose a biological function, she loses access to herself, to her desires, to that fluid inner intelligence that arrives not through the mind but through the body, quietly, precisely, without needing to justify itself with logic or evidence. 3 civilizations, 3 continents, thousands of years between them, no contact with each other, no shared language or shared tradition, and every single one arrives at the same conclusion. The womb is not simply an organ, it is a center, a temple, a gate. Egypt carved this into stone. China sealed it inside secret lineages. India mapped it as sacred living energy. These were not myths created to comfort women. These were not primitive attempts to explain biology before science arrived to correct them. These were precise, sophisticated, carefully tested maps of a territory that these cultures explored for centuries. And the territory they were mapping was the full depth of feminine power, not reproductive capacity, not hormonal function, power. The kind of power that the most enduring civilizations in human history considered worth building temples for, worth protecting in secret schools, worth transmitting through generations of women who dedicated their entire lives to understanding it. Now ask yourself a simple question. If the womb was truly nothing more than a muscular bag whose only purpose was to carry a child, why would 3 of the greatest civilizations in human history independently arrive at the conclusion that it was the most sacred space in the female body? The answer to that question is important. But what matters even more right now is a different question entirely. If all of this knowledge existed, if it was this widespread, this ancient, this carefully preserved, then what happened to it? Because somewhere between those temple walls and the modern gynecologist's office, the story changed completely. And the way it changed will make you feel something you did not expect to feel today. It begins with a single word. A word invented approximately 2,400 years ago. A word so perfectly engineered to control that it survived, in one form or another, all the way into your lifetime. A word that quietly shaped how every woman after it would relate to her own body, her own emotions, and her own inner knowing. That word is hysteria, from the Greek hystera, womb. Here is what happened and why it matters to you personally right now. The Greek medical mind was a mind built on order, on hierarchy, on the absolute authority of reason over everything else. And when these physicians turned their attention to the female body, what they found genuinely disturbed them, not because the body was broken, but because it refused to behave the way their system required. The womb moved, it contracted, it shifted, it responded to emotion in ways that could not be predicted or controlled. It seemed to operate by its own intelligence, completely indifferent to logic. And for a civilization built on the premise that reason must govern all things, an organ that followed its own rules was not a mystery worth exploring. It was a threat that needed a name. So they gave it one. They declared that the womb wandered through the body, pressing on other organs, rising toward the throat, causing visions, grief, rage, desire, and inexplicable knowing. They called all of this madness. They built an entire medical framework around the idea that the female body was fundamentally dangerous to the woman living inside it. The prescribed treatments were fumigation, physical pressure on the abdomen, and marriage, offered as literal medical intervention. But underneath every prescription was a message far more powerful than any remedy. Your body is making you irrational. You cannot trust what you feel. You cannot trust what you know. You cannot trust yourself. This was not medicine. This was architecture, the careful construction of a belief system designed to disconnect a woman from the most powerful center she possessed. And it worked. In medieval Europe, the mechanism simply changed its costume. Women who felt too precisely, who predicted too accurately, who refused to be quiet about what they knew, were no longer called hysterical. They were called possessed. Their bodies became legal evidence against them. Court records from that era are filled with descriptions of unusual sensations in the lower abdomen, birthmarks, physical irregularities, presented as proof of guilt. The womb that Egypt had called the gate of life became, in the hands of a different civilization, the seal of the devil. Think about the distance between those two descriptions. The gate of life, the seal of the devil. The same organ, the same body, two completely opposite stories, and only one of them served the woman herself. By the 19th century, hysteria had become an epidemic across Europe and America, not because women were losing their minds in unprecedented numbers, but because any expression of inner life that could not be controlled, predicted, or conveniently categorized received that label automatically. Grief, passion, spiritual experience, sharp intuition, creative intensity, all of it, hysteria, all of it, evidence of a body that needed to be managed. Then, in the 20th century, the word was quietly removed from medical classifications. No announcement, no apology, just a silent deletion as if the entire history had never happened. But only the word was removed, not the mechanism. Today, when a woman walks into a medical office carrying pain that does not appear on any scan, or a heaviness that no test can measure, or a cycle that has been trying to communicate something for years, she is most often told, it is stress, it is age, it is hormones. Come back if it gets worse. No one asks what the body might be trying to say, because the system was never rebuilt around listening. It was rebuilt around managing. And when management fails, it moves directly to removal. Hysterectomy remains one of the most frequently performed surgeries in the world. In many cases, it is necessary and genuinely life-improving. But in many other cases, women report being offered removal as a first option, not a last one. As if the only question worth asking is whether the organ is still biologically functional. Not what it has been holding, not what it has been trying to express, not what will be lost beyond the physical tissue. And here is what makes this personal. Not historical, not abstract and personal. Every woman alive today grew up inside this system. Every woman absorbed in some form the message that her body's signals are unreliable, that her inner knowing is suspicious, that what she feels in the deep center of herself requires external validation before it can be trusted. That inheritance is sitting in your body right now, in the places you hold tension without knowing why, in the words you chose not to say, in the feelings you learned to dismiss before they could fully form. This is the moment to name that inheritance clearly, and to begin to release it. Write this in the comments right now, exactly as it appears. I inhabit my sacred center and speak my truth. Not because it is a formula, because the act of writing it is the first time many women will have claimed that sentence as their own. Let it land. Let it be witnessed by every other woman reading these comments after you. That is not a small thing. That is the beginning of something real. And if this video has already shifted something inside you, if you feel that quiet recognition that means truth has arrived, then you are one of the chosen ones who understand the value of what is being shared here. Only the chosen ones will click the button on your screen right now to subscribe to this channel and carry this knowledge forward. Share this video today with at least one woman in your life who needs to hear it. A friend, a sister, a mother, a daughter. You already know who came to mind. That instinct is not random. That is your womb speaking, already awake, already pointing the way. Because what comes next in this story is the part that changes everything. Science has recently discovered something inside the womb that no one expected to find. Something that makes every ancient map suddenly look less like mythology and more like precise, accurate documentation. And once you hear it, you will never again look at your own body the same way. Here is something that no anatomy textbook will ever show you. The womb is not an isolated organ. It is not a passive chamber sitting quietly in the lower abdomen, waiting to be useful or waiting to be removed. It is one of the most neurologically active structures in the entire human body, and what researchers have found inside it in recent years is forcing a quiet but profound revision of everything medicine thought it understood. The womb is directly connected to the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body. It runs from the base of the brain all the way down through the heart, the lungs, the digestive system, and into the pelvis. It is the primary communication channel between your inner organs and your brain. It is the biological pathway through which your body sends emotional signals upward into conscious awareness. And the womb is wired into it. The womb produces its own neuropeptides, chemical messengers that the brain uses to think, to feel, and to regulate mood. It communicates directly with the hippocampus, the region of the brain responsible for memory, emotional learning, and spatial orientation. When the womb is removed, studies show that women experience measurable decline in spatial memory, increased anxiety, and reduced capacity for certain types of learning. These effects cannot be fully explained by the loss of hormones alone. The womb itself was participating in how a woman thinks, in how she remembers, in how she finds her way through the world. Read that again slowly. The womb was participating in thought. Now ask yourself, if that is what science is only beginning to document now, what did the women who spent centuries listening to this organ already know that we have not yet found the language to measure? But the most surprising discovery is not in the neurology. It is in something far simpler, something you can feel in your own body right now if you pay attention. The womb and the throat are one system. This is not poetry. This is not spiritual metaphor dressed up to sound scientific. This is tissue. The cervix and the vocal cords are made of the same type of cellular material. They respond to the same hormones. Estrogen changes the state of the vocal cords in the same rhythm that it changes the state of the cervix across the monthly cycle. When one contracts, the other follows. They are physiologically linked in a way that medicine has documented but rarely discusses in any meaningful context. Traditional midwives across completely separate cultures, from Mexico to Russia to West Africa, independently arrived at the same practical knowledge. If a woman's throat is tight during labor, her cervix will not open. To open the body below, you must first open the body above. The woman must sound. She must allow her voice to move downward, vibrating through the chest, through the belly, into the womb itself. Voice and womb are not two separate things. They are one continuous architecture, which means something else, something that lands much closer to home. Every time you swallowed a word that needed to be spoken, that word did not disappear. It traveled from the throat into the chest, from the chest into the belly, from the belly into the womb, where it became tension, then tightening, then, over years, something harder, a knot of unspoken accumulation that the body eventually had to address in the only language available to it. This is not dismissive psychosomatic theory. This is measurable biology. Chronic emotional suppression elevates cortisol. Elevated cortisol disrupts the balance between estrogen and progesterone. Disrupted hormonal balance creates the precise internal conditions in which fibroids develop, cysts form, and endometrial tissue begins to behave erratically. The chain from silence to diagnosis is not symbolic. It is biochemical. So here is the question that changes everything. What has your womb been holding? Not abstractly, specifically. Think about the first time you felt ashamed of your own body. Really ashamed. In a way that settled somewhere deep and never fully left. Think about the medical appointment, where something was said carelessly, and you nodded and drove home and did not let yourself feel how much it hurt. Think about the moment when someone touched you, and you did not want them to, and you said nothing. Think about the grief you were handed and told to process quickly, because the circumstances did not justify a longer mourning. Think about the closeness you participated in with your body while the rest of you waited somewhere just outside the room. All of it went somewhere. The body is extraordinarily faithful. It keeps everything. Egyptian women who served in the temples of Hathor understood this with complete clarity. They did not sing in those womb-shaped sanctuaries for spiritual decoration. They sang because sound was the tool they used to move what had become stuck. They swayed their hips and opened their throats simultaneously because they knew, practically, experientially across generations of transmitted knowledge, that the voice could reach places that hands could not. That vibration could dissolve what no medicine could touch. Cleansing the womb with sound was not a ritual. It was maintenance, as necessary and as regular as cleaning the body with water. The womb has been holding your history, your silences, your losses that were never properly mourned, your anger that was never safely expressed, your joy that was interrupted before it could complete itself, and it has been waiting, with a patience that is almost impossible to comprehend, for you to finally turn toward it and ask what it needs. What happens when you do that is not what most people expect, and it is exactly what comes next. There is a moment in every woman's life that no one prepares her for. Not the first period, not childbirth, not the last bleed. Something quieter than all of those. A moment that arrives without announcement, usually somewhere between the ages of 35 and 50, when the body stops whispering and begins to speak in full sentences. When the accumulated weight of everything that was carried, suppressed, given away, and silenced finally reaches a threshold that cannot be ignored. Most women experience this moment as a crisis, a diagnosis, a breakdown, a season of inexplicable exhaustion or pain, or emotional flooding that the medical system cannot fully explain and cannot fully resolve. But ancient traditions recognized this moment as something else entirely. They called it the turning, and they built their entire understanding of a woman's life around what came before it, what happened during it, and what became possible after it. They divided a woman's life not by reproductive milestones, but by 3 ages of power, each one deeper than the last, each one containing a gift that the previous one could not offer, and the most powerful of the 3 is the one that modern culture has worked hardest to erase. The first age begins with the first blood. In cultures that understood what this moment meant, it was not hidden. It was celebrated. Among the Apache of North America, a girl's first menstruation triggered a 4-day ceremony called the Sunrise Dance, one of the most physically and spiritually demanding rites in the entire tradition. The community gathered. Elder women transmitted knowledge. The girl danced from sunrise to sunrise, not as performance but as initiation. She was not entering inconvenience. She was entering power. She was being welcomed into a lineage of women who knew what their bodies were capable of. In Japan, certain traditional communities marked the first blood with a meal of red rice, sekihan, shared with family and neighbors. Red for life, red for the sacred, red as something worth gathering around a table for. Compare that to the experience of the majority of women alive today. A box slid under a bathroom door, a hushed conversation. The clear instruction, spoken or unspoken, that this is something to be managed privately and mentioned to no one. The first wound of the first age, the message that the body's most fundamental rhythm is something to be ashamed of, is delivered so early and so quietly that most women cannot even remember receiving it. They only feel its effects, years later, in the tension they carry in their pelvis and the distance they maintain from their own center. The second age arrives somewhere in the 30s, and globally, the data here is stark. Uterine fibroids affect an estimated 70% of women by the age of 50. Endometriosis affects approximately 190 million women worldwide. Polycystic ovary syndrome affects roughly 1 in 10 women of reproductive age. These are not rare conditions. They are not unfortunate genetic anomalies distributed randomly across the population. They are a collective signal, arriving from the bodies of hundreds of millions of women simultaneously, that something in the way women are living, in the way they are being asked to carry, to suppress, to perform, to give without replenishment, has reached a point of internal overflow. Aztec healers had a name for this phase. They called it the time of firewater, the period when a woman's inner heat reaches its absolute peak and demands a channel outward. If that channel exists, through creative expression, through honest voice, through movement, through genuine rest, through a life that has space in it for the self, the fire becomes extraordinary fuel. Women in this age who are connected to their center describe a quality of energy and clarity that they have never experienced before, a sense of knowing what matters and what does not, a willingness to stop performing and start living. But when the channel is blocked, when the fire has nowhere to go, it turns inward, and the body, faithful as always, shows exactly where the pressure has accumulated. Then comes the third age, and this is where the story makes its most unexpected turn. The Navajo people have a concept with no direct equivalent in modern languages. A woman who has passed through menopause does not become, in their framework, someone who has lost something. She becomes a keeper of blood. The logic beneath this title is precise and radical. While a woman menstruates, she gives. Every month, life force moves outward from her body into the world. It is a monthly act of biological generosity that continues for decades. When the cycle ends for the first time in her adult life, that energy does not leave. It stays. It accumulates. It transforms into something that no younger woman, regardless of her gifts, yet has access to. In Celtic tradition, the triple goddess, maiden, mother, crone, placed the elder woman at the apex of power, not the base. The crone was not a figure of loss or irrelevance. She was the one who stood closest to the threshold between worlds, the one whose perception was no longer filtered through the demands of the cycle, the one who saw clearly precisely because she was no longer spending her energy on becoming. She had arrived. Here is the fact that the anti-aging industry spends billions of dollars per year hoping you will never fully absorb. A woman after menopause, connected to her center, carrying the processed wisdom of everything she has lived, is not a diminished version of what she was. She is the completed version. And the 5 practices that unlock that completion are far simpler than anyone has told you. The philosopher Lao Tzu wrote, more than 2,000 years ago, that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. He was not speaking about distance. He was speaking about the gap between knowing and doing, the most important gap in any human life. Because knowledge that is never embodied is not transformation, it is decoration. You have just crossed a significant threshold. You now carry an understanding that most women around you do not have. And with that understanding comes a choice that only you can make. So here is the strategic path forward, not a vague spiritual invitation. A concrete, practical, sequential plan that you can begin tonight, in your own home, without any special equipment, any teacher, or anyone's permission. The first practice is called womb listening. Lie on your back in a quiet space. Place both hands flat on your lower abdomen, below the navel. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly and deeply, directing each breath downward so that your hands rise and fall with every cycle. Do this for 2 full minutes without asking anything of your body. Then ask one simple question inward. What are you feeling? Do not construct an answer with your mind. Wait, The response may arrive as warmth, as pressure, as a sudden emotion without apparent cause, as an image, as an inexplicable urge to cry or to rest. All of it is information. All of it is your body beginning to speak in a language it has not been invited to use in years. The Taoist mistresses began every apprenticeship with exactly this practice, not with technique, but with silence. Before you can work with the womb, they taught, you must first acknowledge that it exists, and that it has something to say. The second practice reconnects the system that was severed by years of swallowed words. Sit comfortably. Place one hand on your lower belly and one hand on your throat. Take a deep breath, and on the exhale, produce a single low, sustained sound. Not a word, just a vibration. Direct it downward. Feel it move through the chest, through the sternum, into the space beneath your lower hand. 5 minutes of this daily begins to restore the biological connection between voice and womb that the cervix and vocal cords share at the tissue level. Women who practice this consistently report that within 2 weeks, something in the pelvic region begins to feel warmer, more present, more alive, as if a room that had been locked for years was finally being aired. The third practice is the lunar journal. Every evening, write one sentence describing what you felt in your body that day. Not your thoughts, not your schedule, not your productivity, your body. Heaviness, lightness, warmth in the lower belly, unexpected irritability, a sudden wave of tenderness. Over 2 to 3 lunar cycles, patterns will emerge that have nothing to do with your calendar and everything to do with your own internal rhythm. The rhythm that was always there, running beneath the surface of every deadline and obligation, waiting to be noticed. The fourth practice is the simplest and the one most women resist the longest. 5 minutes of slow circular hip movement each morning. Not exercise, not choreography, just the pelvis drawing slow circles in the air, the attention dropping inward with each rotation. The Egyptian women who served in the temples of Hathor understood that the womb responds to movement the way a river responds to rain. It needs circulation. It needs to be remembered by the body it lives in. 5 minutes, every morning, before the day covers you. The fifth practice requires nothing physical at all. Before you sleep tonight, place your hand on your lower abdomen and say thank you. Not a formula, a genuine acknowledgement for what this center has carried, for what it has absorbed, for the decades of silent service it has offered without recognition. If your womb has been surgically removed, place your hand on that space anyway. The energetic center does not leave with the tissue. Women who do this after hysterectomy consistently describe the same experience: warmth where there was emptiness, presence where there was loss. The body receives gratitude the way a long-ignored child receives attention, with immediate, unmistakable response. The philosopher Simone de Beauvoir wrote that one is not born a woman, one becomes one. She meant it as a critique of